I was acutely suicidal and saw no other way out. How being sectioned saved my life. Over the past few years, conversations about mental health have become much more open. My own certainly have. I've gone from trying to conceal my shameful secret to being able to talk and write honestly about my experiences. But there's one thing I'm not so upfront about, and that's the fact that I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act 1983 earlier this year. Prior to being sectioned, my mental health had deteriorated frighteningly quickly over the space of a few weeks, and I'd been admitted to hospital as an informal, voluntary patient. After a fortnight, I was desperate to go home. My husband and I put the case for discharge to the doctor, and I was allowed to leave. It was the wrong decision. The 10 days that followed were a terrifying descent into a darker place than I'd ever been before. I was acutely suicidal and saw no other way out. A condition of my discharge was that I was seen regularly at home by the local crisis team. It was after a particularly turbulent meeting with them, where I refused to go back into hospital voluntarily, that a formal Mental Health Act assessment was called. That afternoon, I was visited at home by 3 mental health professionals whose job was to decide whether I should be readmitted against my will. When a Mental Health Act assessment is ordered, 3 people have to agree that it's in your best interests to be sectioned. These are usually approved mental health professionals, AMHP, such as a mental health nurse or social worker, and 2 doctors, one of whom is normally a psychiatrist. Ideally, one of them should know the patient, although this wasn't the case for me as I was being assessed late on a Sunday afternoon. Over the next half hour, they questioned me about my symptoms and intentions, a process I found intrusive and upsetting. Gynecologists warned that putting yogurt in your vagina won't help to treat thrush. Shame-free tampon ads show blood-stained sheets and tampon strings. How writing a diary helps support my mental health. I was actively planning my suicide, and no one was going to convince me otherwise. Eventually, I was asked to wait in the kitchen while the mental health team decided my fate in the living room. I thought I'd done enough to stay at home. But when I was called back in, nearly an hour later, I was told that I was being detained under the Mental Health Act. They decided it had become too difficult for the crisis team to support me, and there was no other option but to admit me to hospital. I was devastated. How had things come to this? There are around 64,000 detentions under the Mental Health Act each year. It's only considered if someone is very unwell, and the decision is not made lightly. According to the Royal College of Psychiatrists, you can be sectioned if you have or are thought to have a mental illness that needs assessment or treatment, which is sufficiently serious that it's considered necessary for your own or other people's safety, and you need to be in hospital, but are unable or unwilling to give consent. I was admitted under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act, meaning I could be detained in hospital for up to 28 days. I wasn't allowed to refuse treatment while I was there. If I had, they could have treated me against my will. In practice, though, being in hospital under Section wasn't that different from being an informal patient. I had to request formal approval to leave the ward, for example, to meet my family in the grounds, and when I did, I had to be accompanied. But I complied with my treatment and committed to behaving myself in the hope that I'd be discharged promptly. In the end, my section was lifted after a fortnight. I remained an inpatient for another 10 days or so, but was allowed home leave, which was gradually increased in the run-up to discharge. When I did leave hospital, I was still unwell, but I no longer felt I was a danger to myself. I won't lie, I was, and still am, mortified about being sectioned. It was a harrowing and humiliating experience. But in hindsight, had I not been detained, I've no doubt that I would have died by suicide. Being sectioned meant that I was in a place of safety until the crisis had passed. 6 months on, my mental health has greatly improved, largely due to the treatment regime that was devised for me in hospital, and I'm glad to be alive. It's thanks to being sectioned that I'm still here. For emotional support, you can call the Samaritans 24-hour helpline on 116 123. Email joe@samaritans.org. Visit a Samaritans branch in person or go to the Samaritans website. More. What happened when I came out about my mental illness on Facebook? More. How to talk to your child about mental health. More. I may need mental health medication forever, and that's okay.